They say New York never sleeps, but on the upper floors of a hotel that once ruled the world, there is a suite no one books, a door left slightly open, a worn leather chair, and an old man who returns every morning, sitting silently by the window, staring down at Manhattan as if waiting for someone to come back, or for the past itself to step through the doorway and call his name. Main story. He's one of the last people alive who witnessed the Waldorf Astoria at its height when European kings treated the place like a second palace, when American tycoons used its ballrooms as quiet battlegrounds long before boardrooms sealed their deals. Now, inside this empty suite, only memories remain, clinging to the wallpaper like fading perfume. From his window, he sees a city that has forgotten how much of its early ambition was shaped inside these walls. He remembers the nights when the chandeliers burned brighter than the skyline outside, when a single gala could shift alliances between families, fortunes, even nations. When the Waldorf wasn't just a hotel, it was the announcement of who truly mattered. The walls feel thinner now, almost translucent, as if the past is still humming behind them. Dancers spinning under gold ceilings, crystal glasses striking in whispered conspiracies, footsteps of presidents and criminals crossing. The same marble floors, all of it still echoing, but fewer and fewer people left to recognize the sound. And the old man, perhaps the final witness to its hidden history, knows one truth more than anyone: the Waldorf's glow never really died. It is simply fading in the eyes of those who once lived inside its light. The old man closes his eyes for a moment, letting the echoes of a vanished world settle around him. Because to understand why the Waldorf Astoria on CE stood at the center of American high society, you have to go back before the presidents and the movie stars, before the gold ceilings and the whispered conspiracies, to a time when New York itself was still deciding what kind of empire it wanted to become. And at the heart of that decision were two cousins, and one street that wasn't big enough for both of them. In the late 1800s, America was a country obsessed with proving itself. Railroads were stretching to the Pacific, steel was rising out of Pittsburgh, and fortunes were being built faster than anyone could count. But knowing shone brighter than the Astors, the family whose wealth, power, and influence shaped the very idea of American aristocracy. Yet inside that dynasty, a silent storm was brewing. William Waldorf Astor and his cousin John Jacob Astor were born into the same river of money, but they were raised on opposite shores. William preferred Europe's refinement opera houses, libraries, evening spent discussing politics under soft lamplight. John Jacob, however, embodied the new American spirit, bold, restless, hungry to be seen. Manhattan wasn't big enough for both visions, and Fifth Avenue became the battlefield where two ideas of America collided. It began with something as old as humanity itself: pride. William built the original Waldorf Hotel just as a business, but as a statement, an American hotel with European grace, a place that could make New York feel older, wiser, more dignified. But to John Jacob, it felt like an insult, an unspoken challenge thrown across the family estate. So he answered the only way a Gilded Age titan knew how. He built a bigger hotel right next door. They called it the Astoria, two glittering giants side by side, connected by blood, but divided by ego. Guests joked that you could hear the cousins arguing through the brickwork. But beneath the humor was a deeper truth: America was changing, and the Astors were leaving symbols of that change. Old world elegance against new world ambition, tradition versus reinvention. A quiet family feud shaping the skyline of the richest city on earth. And in the middle of it all were the New Yorkers themselves, immigrants, shopkeepers, factory workers, watching the towers rise like monuments to a dream they hoped might someday include them. The hotels became more than buildings. They became mirrors reflecting the country's identity crisis. Were Americans destined to imitate Europe's old aristocracies, or to create something entirely their own inside? The ballrooms, society women in jeweled gowns debated which Cousins Hotel served the better champagne. Outside, carriage drivers gathered on the curb swapping gossip about which Astor was winning the war. Even newspapers turned the family feud into front-page theater, feeding a nation hungry for spectacle. But every war, even one fought with marble staircases and chandeliers, takes its toll. And eventually, the Cousins realized what every New Yorker already knew. Neither hotel could truly dominate as long as the other stood. Competition was sharpening them, but it was also bleeding them. And that is where the story shifts, because soon, the two rivals would do something unthinkable. They would unite. But before that unlikely moment arrived, New York would witness a chapter of extravagance and tension unlike anything in its history, a chapter where ballrooms became battlegrounds, and where the American upper class learned that power is never inherited peacefully. It is fought for, displayed, paraded, and sometimes lost. And the old man in the empty suite, he remembers the day the two cousins finally met face to face, because that moment didn't just change a family, it changed the fate of a city. The feud between the two Astor cousins should have ended at the property line. But in New York, where reputations rise faster than buildings, ego rarely stays contained. And as the Waldorf and the Astoria glittered side by side, something unexpected began to happen. Their rivalry moved indoors, into the very rooms meant for elegance, diplomacy, and celebration, because in the Gilded Age, a ballroom wasn't just a ballroom, it was a battlefield. If Fifth Avenue was the spine of old New York society, then the ballrooms of the Waldorf and Astoria were its beating heart. Under chandeliers imported from Vienna and ceilings painted like Renaissance skies, America's wealthiest families performed their most carefully choreographed dance, not the waltz, but the performance of power. These evenings weren't simply social events. They were declarations. Every dress, every seating arrangement, every whispered conversation carried weight. A glance could seal a marriage, alliance. A handshake could start a railroad merger. And one misstep, a spilled drink, a misjudged remark could exile a family from the social map for years. New York's high society was inventing a distinctly American aristocracy, and it did so in real time, under the glow of 10,000 electric bulbs. While Europe inherited its status from centuries of tradition, New York manufactured its own, right there on polished parquet floors. And somehow, the Waldorf and the Astoria became the stages for all of it. The 400 Misses as legendary list of those who mattered, treated the hotels as their personal realm. Young debutantes descended grand staircases as orchestras swelled, their futures negotiated behind fans and champagne flutes. Politicians slipped out of smoke-filled anterooms where deals were struck in low voices, while newspaper reporters lingered near the kitchens, hoping to catch rumors that would sell tomorrow's papers. But beneath the glamour was a sharper truth. Every gala was a strategic move in the Astor family war. William's Waldorf emphasized European sophistication, formal, understated, elegant. John Jacobs' Astoria countered with brash American energy, bigger orchestras, brighter lighting, grander menus. One hotel was designed to impress the old world, the other to dominate the new. Hosts felt forced to choose sides, and many did so with the subtlety of a campaign button. A society matron might attend only Waldorf dinners, but refuse Astoria teas. A steel magnate might hold his heir's engagement party at one hotel specifically to provoke guests at the other. Even the staff felt the divide. Waiters knew which guests tipped better based on which Astor they supported. And despite the rivalry, something strangely unifying happened, America saw itself in this conflict. The refined elegance of the Waldorf represented what the nation aspired to become. The bold ambition of the Astoria represented what the nation already was. The tension between the two embodied the tension inside every American dreamer yearning to be respectable, but never quite ready to stop fighting for more. Night after night, the ballrooms soaked up laughter, secrets, victories, betrayals. They became repositories of human ambition, echo chambers of American desire. If the walls could talk, they would recite the birth of modern capitalism and the mistakes that came with it. But nothing, not even spectacle, lasts forever. As the feuds grew sharper and the galas grew louder, the cost financial and emotional became impossible to ignore. The cousins' rivalry was fueling the city's curiosity, but draining their fortunes. And slowly, New York began to whisper the unthinkable. What if the two Astors joined forces? It was a question that would reshape not just the hotels, but the destiny of Manhattan itself. And the old man in the forgotten suite, then just a young bellboy polishing silver wood, witnessed the moment the battle lines dissolved into something astonishing, a peace treaty written in marble. The ballroom battles had dazzled New York long enough. Champagne flowed, newspapers gossiped, fortunes shifted under chandeliers. But even the most glittering war grows exhausting. The city sensed it. Before the cousins did, the Waldorf and the Astoria weren't rising higher, they were wearing each other down. And in a country defined by reinvention, conflicts rarely end in surrender. They end in transformation. That transformation began with an idea so unthinkable. New Yorkers first laughed at it. What if the two hotels became one? At the dawn of the 20th century, America was stepping boldly into its own century, industrial power humming, immigration reshaping its cities, and New York emerging as the unofficial capital of the world. But even in a booming country, maintaining two enormous rival hotels on the same block was a heavy burden. Staff whispered about overlapping costs, duplicated services, and to sets of ballrooms competing for the same wealthy guests. Behind closed doors, accountants murmured what society refused to believe out loud. The cousins needed each other, and so, in a rare moment of clarity, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps wisdom, the Astors chose cooperation over confrontation. A private agreement was drafted, signatures exchanged, handshakes made not out of affection but necessity. The Waldorf and Astoria would merge, not as equals, but as halves of something grander than either could create alone. The result was a masterpiece, the Waldorf Astoria, a hotel so luxurious, so technologically advanced, that it felt less like a building and more like America announcing its arrival on the world stage. The grand corridors stretched longer than most European palaces. Elevators glided silently between floors. Every room had a telephone, an extravagant novelty at the time. Electricity illuminated the hallways in warm amber light, giving the hotel a glow that could be seen from blocks away. But beyond the marble and the gold leaf was something deeply human, a sense of belonging. For the first time, New York's elite moved through the same doors, shared the same halls, breathed the same charged air. Young couples danced under murals of mythic gods. Industrialists toasted railroad deals beside opera singers and foreign diplomats. Presidents stayed in private suites, designed with hush-thick carpets, so that history could unfold without waking the floors below. The hotel became a living archive of American aspiration, a place where immigrants whispered dreams in the service hallways, where debutantes practiced curtsies before stepping into the spotlight, where senators rehearsed speeches in front of bathroom mirrors. Every person inside, whether billionaire or bellboy, felt they were participating in something larger than themselves, something unmistakably American. And at the heart of it all, quietly, watching from behind the front desk, was the young bellboy who would one day become the old man in the forgotten suite. To him, the merger wasn't about money or architecture. It was about witnessing to warring branches of a family create a cathedral of unity, a rare moment where pride bent, grudges softened, and ambition turned into cooperation. The Waldorf Astoria wasn't just a palace for the wealthy. It was a symbol of a nation learning to build, not for rivalry, but for legacy. But legacy, like any structure, is vulnerable. And as New York's skyline prepared to stretch even higher, the hotel that once captured the world's imagination would soon face a force no ballroom, no cousin, no merger could stop. Time, the old man remembered that shift, the subtle tremor in the city's breath when Manhattan began looking northward toward a new district rising with steel and promise. And that is where the story moves next. The Waldorf Astoria may have been built on Astor wealth and American ambition, but its heartbeat never belonged to the cousins, nor to the millionaires who danced beneath its chandeliers. It belonged to the people whose names were never printed in newspapers, the ones polishing silver before dawn, guiding trembling debutantes down grand staircases, and carrying suitcases heavy with the secrets of the world. And if the walls of the Waldorf held memories, the staff carried the truth. In the golden age of the hotel, you could Washington OK through its staff corridors and hear 10 languages echoing at once: Italian porters, Irish maids, German cooks, French motters, hotel immigrants who brought their traditions, their hopes, and their unmatched pride in service. For many of them, the Waldorf was more than a workplace. It was a gateway, a ladder, a chance to belong to America in a way Ellis Island could never promise alone. They saw everything a bellboy might deliver: a telegram that ended a business empire, a maid might pick up a torn photograph left behind after a marriage collapsed during a weekend stay, a bartender could watch a titan of industry drink quietly in the corner, the weight of a nation in his slumped shoulders. And occasionally, the staff witnessed moments of tenderness the guests themselves would never admit to: a famous actress humming to herself after a performance, a senator wiping tears before a crucial vote, a king staring at his reflection as if trying to remember the man behind the crown. The Waldorf's luxury had always dazzled the world, but the staff understood something deeper. Behind every diamond necklace was a story. Behind every smile was a fear. Behind every powerful figure was a person trying desperately to hold their life together. America's Gilded Age was not just excess. It was pressure, immense, unspoken pressure. And the staff became the quiet guardians of that truth. Take the head concierge, for instance, a man who kept a small notebook filled with every preference of every regular guest. Which senator liked his shoes polished twice? Which banker preferred a specific corner table? Which heiress feared thunderstorms, not out of obligation, but out of pride? He believed service was an art form, a kind of invisible architecture. Holding the hotel upright. There were the elevator operators who learned to read guests' moods by the way they stepped inside. The seamstresses who repaired gowns minutes before the orchestra began. The cooks who created midnight meals for musicians, too nervous to eat before performing. The doorman who, in a single gesture of opening the door, could make an immigrant laborer feel like a visitor. NG prints. They were witnesses, not just to luxury, but to humanity. As the years passed, they watched generations of American culture shift before their eyes. Prohibition sent jazz musicians whisking rough the service hallways towards secret parties. The Great Depression darkened the hotel's lobbies, even as the wealthy pretended their fortunes remained untouched. World War II turned tased into hushed meeting rooms where world leaders discussed alliances that would reshape the planet. And always, the staff stood nearby, silent, steady, observant. The old man in the forgot and suite had once been one of them, a bellboy who learned That history wasn't written in books first it passed through the lobby. He remembered seeing Howard Hughes pace the corridors at 3 a.m. Frank Sinatra slipping into hidden elevators, presidents practicing speeches, while the sound of typewriters filled the hallways. He remembered the feeling of belonging to something bigger than one Joe, B or one building. To him, the Waldorf Astoria was a universe made possible by people like him, people who saw everything, said nothing, and carried the soul of the hotel in their fingertips. But even the most loyal witnesses cannot stop the march of change. And outside the hotel's revolving doors, New York itself was beginning to shift. The city's energy, once centered around Fifth Avenue and the Waldorf's marble steps, was migrating northward toward a new district made of steel, ambition, and the restless pulse of a modern age. And that slow, inevitable migration would bring the hotel to its next turning point, one it could neither outrun nor ignore. For decades, the Waldorf Astoria reigned as the beating heart of Manhattan, a palace for the powerful, a sanctuary for the fragile, a crossroads where history shook hands with fate. But no empire, no matter how gilded, is immune to the shifting tides of a growing nation. And while the staff kept the hotel alive from within, forces outside its walls were quietly rewriting the geography of American ambition. The day would come when New York stopped looking toward the Waldorf and started looking north. Cities don't move suddenly, they drift, pulled by commerce, culture, and the gravitational force of dreams. In the early 20th century, that drift was unmistakable. Midtown, once a sparse district of brownstones and stables, began rising with steel skeletons that pierced the sky. Corporate headquarters, shopping emporiums, theaters, and new apartment blocks pulled the city's energy uptown like a magnet. And for the first time, the Waldorf felt old. Not in its beauty, its chandeliers still glittered, its ballrooms still echoed with music, but in its position. Fifth Avenue, once the epicenter of everything, was no longer where the future wanted to be. New money preferred newer blocks. New companies wanted modern towers. The city's pulse had shifted, and Manhattan's center of gravity moved with it. Guests noticed it first. A banker hesitated before booking a suite, wondering whether staying downtown made him look out of touch. A rising Broadway star preferred hotels closer to Times Square. Young entrepreneurs, fueled by the spirit of a new America, sought spaces where glass reflected sunlight instead of history. Even the staff felt the change. The doorman saw fewer carriages pulling up, replaced by taxis that sped past toward Midtown. The concierge fielded more questions about uptown clubs than Waldorf restaurants, and the bellboy, now older, wiser, felt a subtle ache in his chest, sensing the hotel he loved was no longer the city's inevitable destination, but a choice made only by those who remembered its glory. Archite, couture mirrored culture. America was reinventing itself. Again, this time, upward. Skyscrapers didn't just compete with each other. They competed with the past. Every new tower aimed to outshine the last, each one taller, sharper, more confident. It was a distinctly American phenomenon, the belief that progress should always rise higher, that success should always be visible, that the skyline itself should reflect national ambition. And so, Midtown soared while the Waldorf stood still. By the 1920s, the hotel's location was no longer enviable, it was inconvenient. The city's elite now gathered further north, where business boomed and culture thrived. The Waldorf's grand staircases and velvet carpets, once symbols of modernity, began to feel like artifacts of a bygone era. But the deepest blow came not from culture, but from real estate. The land beneath the Waldorf Astoria had become more valuable than the hotel itself. Its architecture, once revolutionary, couldn't compete with the economic logic of a plot destined for something bigger, something that would change the skyline forever. The old man, then a middle-aged staff member, remembered the day the rumors began. Staff whispered in hallways. Guests leaned closer at dinner tables. Executives held tense meetings behind closed doors. Could it be true? Could the Waldorf be replaced? It was unthinkable, and yet undeniable. Manhattan's momentum was no longer aligned with history. It was aligned with the future of future rising in girders and blueprints. In the confidence of architects and the hunger of developers, the Waldorf Astoria, for all its splendor, was built for a New York that no longer existed. The city had outgrown its palace, and as the sun set behind the towers of the new Midtown, casting long shadows over the hotel's aging facade, the old man understood something painful but profound. New York destroys what it worships, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, and the decision that followed, bold, brutal, historic, would mark the end of one legend and the beginning of another, a decision that would bring the Waldorf to its final stand, a decision that would pave the way for a skyscraper that promised to swallow the sky. When a city chases the future, something must be left behind. New York had made its choice. Its center of gravity had marched uptown. Its height aimed skyward, and though the Waldorf Astoria still sparkled with nightly dances and polished silver, everyone inside felt the shift. The hotel was no longer shaping the city's destiny. It was standing in the path of it, and in New York, anything standing in the way of progress is marked for demolition, even a legend. The idea arrived quietly, at first an architectural whisper, a new tower, a taller tower, a tower unlike anything the world had seen. But as plans spread from back rooms to boardrooms, the whisper hardened into a statement that stunned the city. To build the tour, the Waldorf must fall. For older New Yorkers, the announcement felt sacrilegious. The Waldorf Astoria wasn't just a building. It was memory. It was elegance, identity, myth. But the 1920s boom had shifted the nation's priorities. America was obsessed with height, speed, and spectacle, and its young architects carried the fever of a country convinced that greatness must be visible from miles away. The staff heard the news in fragments. A cook overheard a contractor discussing timelines. A maid saw unfamiliar blueprints left on a desk. The concierge noticed executives speaking in hushed tones, their expressions solemn, and the old bellboy, now a man worn by decades of service, felt the truth settle in his stomach like cold iron. The Waldorf was dying, not from neglect, but from ambition. When the official announcement came, the reaction rippled across the nation. Newspapers printed obituaries for the hotel, as if it were a beloved public figure. Former SDS sent letters recounting engagements, reconciliations, heartbreaks that had unfolded under its chandeliers. Even presidents expressed disbelief that the city could tear down such a cornerstone of American life. But New York, as always, believed one thing: the past is important, but the skyline is sacred. And so the countdown began. As demolition crews arrived, something remarkable happened. The guests grew quiet. Parties felt subdued, as if every note of music carried a hint of mourning. Staff members walked the halls more slowly, touching familiar railings, memorizing patterns in the wallpaper, pausing to savor the echo of their own footsteps. The Waldorf wasn't just being dismantled, it was being grieved. Workers who had once polished head floors now watched as carpenters removed mirrors and chandeliers for salvage. The grand ballroom where alliances formed and hearts broke was stripped piece by piece. Marble columns that had survived champagne spills, political arguments, and midnight confessions were gently removed like ancient bones. And through it all, the old staff stood by, not protesting, not pleading, but witnessing, because who else could testify to a lifetime lived inside those walls? The day the demolition began, a crowd gathered outside. Some were tourists, some were former guests, some were workers from the neighborhood who had walked past the hotel every morning of their lives, and some quiet, respectful, almost reverent, were former staff members wearing old uniforms, hands clasped behind their backs. The first strike of the wrecking ball sounded like a heartbeat stopping. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Dust rose like a ghost. The facade cracked, revealing the skeleton of memories behind it. And as bricks tumbled to the ground, it felt less like destruction and more like a burial, an acknowledgement that the Waldorf had lived a full life, and that its legacy was ready to be reborn, because standing in its place would be something unprecedented. A skyscraper that promised to redefine not just New York, but America's place in the world. The Empire State Building, a tower built on the ashes of a palace, a monument constructed from the ambition that had once fueled the Astor cousins. A structure that would swallow the sky and become the symbol of AC. Elm tree that refused to stop climbing. The old man, watching from across the street, understood the paradox better than anyone. Progress demands sacrifice, and sometimes the price of reaching high is letting go of the things that taught you how to stand. The Waldorf was gone, but its story, its ghosts were far from finished. Demolishing a building is usually a matter of logistics, permits, machinery, labor, but demolishing the Waldorf Astoria required something rarer: emotional permission. New Yorkers had to accept that a chapter of their collective identity was ending, and acceptance did not arrive quickly. In the months leading up to demolition, a strange ritual formed. People visited the hotel not to stay, but to remember. Elderly couples who had danced their first waltz in the ballroom wandered the hallways, touching brass railings as if greeting old friends. Former debutantes returned with their grown children, pointing out the staircase where their gloved hands once trembled before stepping into society. Veterans recalled wartime banquets held in honor of foreign allies. Every corridor held a story, and the stories finally surfaced. Everyone sensed the building was listening one last time. The staff, too, began their long goodbye. Some had served so long that the hotel felt like a second spine, holding them upright. He muttered. Hetal, who'd memorized the preferences of senators and opera divas, kept walking toward the dining room each morning, even though it no longer opened for service. The switchboard operator, hence the nerve center of secrets, made a final round through the quiet offices, fingertips brushing the keys that had carried whispers from Washington to Hollywood. Even the kitchen changed its rhythm. Great stoves, once roaring through the night during lavish banquets, called into silence. A chef who had sliced vegetables for 3 presidents sharpened his knives one last time, not for use, but for memory. The bakery that had filled mornings with warm almond scent produced its final batch of rolls, giving them away to staff members as keepsakes, as if the taste itself could preserve past. Meanwhile, New York outside was moving at full speed. Construction cranes dotted the skyline. Streetcars screeched their way uptown. Newspapers printed bold headlines about the next great skyscraper. But inside the Waldorf, time moved differently, slower, softer, as though the walls were resisting their final breath. The old man, before he had become old, watched these final days with a mix of grief and awe. He had spent his youth running through these hallways, delivering telegrams to powerful men who seemed carved from marble. He had learned to judge a guest's mood by the cadence of their footsteps. He had lived entire chapters of his life beneath the glow of chandeliers, listening to the orchestra rehearse through the vents. To him, the hotel wasn't just a building. It was a mentor, a stage, a witness. And now he was witnessing its end. On the final night before the demolition crews took control, a small, unofficial gathering formed in the lobby. No invitations were sent, no orchestra played. Yet people came: staff, former guests, neighborhood workers, even some of the city's elite who usually hid their emotions behind tailored suits. For a moment, the lobby regained its old magic. Conversations rose gently like candlelight. Someone hummed a familiar melody from the ballroom days, and for the first time, there were tears open, unguarded tears for a place that had shaped them. When dawn broke, the lobby was nearly empty. Only the staff remained, standing in formation like a ceremonial guard, not to resist, but to honor. When the demolition foreman approached to begin the process, he paused. The sight of these men and women housekeepers, cooks, porters, concierge standing silently in their uniforms created a hush deeper than any command. It wasn't a protest, it was gratitude. And the foreman, understanding the weight of the moment, removed his cap. For 1 minute, one full, reverent minute, the city held its breath. Only then did the long goodbye end, and the first hammer fell. Dust rose, memories settled, and the legend finally surrendered to the future. But even as the walls cracked, the old man felt something unexpected. The Waldorf was not disappearing. It was scattering into people, into stories, into the city itself. Its spirit was not being erased, but released, and what grew in its place would soon redefine the American imagination. When the dust of the first impact settled, the Waldorf Astoria no longer felt like a building, it fell like a memory unraveling in slow motion. Each brick that fell exposed another layer of New York's past, as if the city were peeling back its own skin to reveal who it once was. Crowds gathered daily, not to celebrate progress, but to bear witness to the passing of something sacred. What they saw wasn't demolition, it was transformation. The city had always demanded reinvention, but this time the reinvention came with a cost everyone could feel. As the walls crumbled, architects and engineers arrived on site with rolled-up blueprints under their arms, documents that looked almost fragile compared to the chaos unfolding in front of them. These were the sketches of a dream so audacious it bordered on madness, a skyscraper that would dwarf anything built before it, a monument to a nation climbing out of the shadows of war and economic uncertainty. The Empire State Building would rise here, on this exact soil, on the foundation of a legend for the workers who cleared the debris. It was impossible not to feel the contradiction. Some had grown up hearing stories about balls held in the Grand Ballroom, or about presidents who once walked the marble corridors. Now they hauled out chunks of those same walls like ordinary rubble. They approached their job with a strange reverence, pausing when they discovered an intact molding, running their hands along a piece of carved stone as if trying to decode the fingerprints of history. They weren't just laborers. They had become archivists of a fading past. Amid them, the former bellboy, now older, his back slightly bent, returned every morning to watch. He wasn't hired, wasn't needed, wasn't even officially allowed inside the construction area. But nobody had the heart to move him. He stood behind the cordon with his hands clasped behind him, observing the demolition with an expression not of bitterness, but of profound understanding. He knew this city. He knew its rhythm. He knew that New York never mourns without creating. And soon, he began noticing something the others hadn't yet seen. The workers weren't just wiping away the Waldorf. They were laying its ghost to rest. One morning, as a massive slab of the old West Wing was removed, sunlight burst through the open shell of the structure, casting long beams across the debris. It created the illusion of a cathedral collapsing into lighter moments so haunting that even the most hardened workers stopped to look. Someone whispered, "It feels like it's giving its blessing." Perhaps it was. As the demolition reached its later stages, the site transformed from ruins into possibility. Where hallways once wound through marble arches, there now lay open air stretching toward the horizon. Where guests once toasted to new fortunes, surveyors now hammered markers into the earth. The space felt both empty and infinite, as if Manhattan itself were inhaling before a monumental exhale. The blueprints for the Empire State Building became the new scripture of the site. Construction managers unrolled them atop makeshift tables, explaining to crews how steel beams would rise faster than any project in history, how rivets, RS would work at breakneck speed, how entire floors would appear in days rather than weeks. It wasn't just a building. It was another American declaration. The workers carried this energy with them. Even those who mourned the Waldorf felt a stirring of pride when they saw the first steel columns delivered. The idea that they were part of something the world had never emptied before pushed them forward. Pain and excitement coexisted in the same breaths. And through it all, the old man watched. He watched the space where the lobby once stood ants form into a grid of chalk lines and surveyor stakes. He watched the sky open wider and wider as the last of the Waldorf's walls disappeared. He watched as the memory of the hotel diffused into stories shared among workers, into dust carried by wind, down Fifth Avenue, into a city already preparing to move on. But he also saw something else, that the Waldorf spirit wasn't dying, it was being reincarnated, because New York doesn't destroy its legends, it absorbs them, it rebuilds them. It elevates them into symbols that carry the city's hunger for more, and soon, the Empire's Tate Building would rise, not replacing the Waldorf, but standing because of it. The old man understood what few did. The past wasn't lost, it was simply changing shape. When the last stones of the old Waldorf Astoria were cleared, and the first steel beams of the Empire State Building pierced the sky, New York moved forward with characteristic confidence. The past had been folded into the blueprint of the future. Yet something lingered, not in the rubble, not in the streets, but in the memories of the people who had once walked those hallways. For a city that prides itself on reinvention, ghosts tend to follow quietly behind. Years later, when the new Waldorf Astoria opened uptown on Park Avenue, it was hailed as a triumph, sleeker, taller, more modern. The world marveled at its Art Deco grandeur, its sweeping corridors, its famous towers where presidents would one day reside. But beneath all the marble and brass, beneath the polished veneer of a new era, lay echoes of the hotel that had once stood downtown. Guests who had known the original sometimes felt it before they understood it, a sense of déjà vu when walking through the new lobby, a familiarity in the way the light struck the gold accents, a memory triggered by the hush of a corridor late at night, as if an old melody were drifting just behind the walls. It was the same hotel, and yet not the same. The young workers who joined the staff of the new Waldorf knew nothing of the old building. At the veterans, those who had polished silver under the original chandeliers carried its spirit within them. They taught the newcomers the invisible rules, the silent grace of service, the intuition of anticipating a need before it is spoken, the discreet understanding that power often wears a smile to hide exhaustion. A new generation of American royalty arrived, film stars from Hollywood, diplomats from Washington, explorers, innovators, dreamers. They walked through the revolving doors expecting luxury and privacy. Few realized they were stepping onto the footprint of generations who came before them, their triumphs and failures layered like sediment beneath the lobby floor. The old man, older still, now became one of the hotel's unofficial historians. No tea because he stood on a stage, but because he lingered in doorways and hallways, recounting tales to younger staff members who didn't understand why he looked at certain corners with quiet reverence. "This used to be the entrance to the ladies' promenade," he would say softly. "Over there, that's where a senator dropped to one knee and begged his mistress to stay. And this place, this exact spot, was once the center of the city's heartbeat." They listened not just out of respect, but because the stories made the walls feel alive. The new Waldorf wasn't merely a structure, it was a vessel carrying the emotional weight of the old one. And strange things happened sometimes. A guest would swear they smelled a faint trace of cigar smoke in a no-smoking wing reminiscent of the raw, ill-road magnates of decades past. A maid claimed she heard ballroom music on nights when no events were scheduled. One evening, a young bellboy saw a woman in a 19th century gown walking down a hallway, only to turn the corner and find the space empty. No one believed the stories literally, but everyone understood them metaphorically. Ghosts don't haunt buildings, they haunt memories, and the Waldorf, both old and new, was built from more memories than even New York could contain. Its walls held the voices of presidents rehearsing their speeches. Its corridors carried the footsteps of kings and queens who once sought refuge from their crumbling empires. Its elevators had lifted hearts broken and repaired. Its rooms had witnessed both the beginning and end of fortunes. The Waldorf, RF, had become a repository of human hope, layered, fragile, persistent. The old man sometimes stood alone in the new lobby at dawn, when sunlight filtered through the Art Deco grillwork like a blessing. In those quiet moments, he felt the past walking beside him, the staff who had passed on, the guests who had shaped history, the cousins whose rivalry had started it all. He understood then that buildings die, but legacies don't. They simply migrate like the city itself, finding new homes, new forms, new reasons to endure. And as he leaned on the railing, breathing in the quiet hum of a waking hotel, he sensed that the story of the Waldorf wasn't nearing its end. It was approaching its meaning, because the ghosts weren't there to haunt, they were there to remind. Even in the new Park Avenue, Waldorf Astoria, long after the dust of the original building had settled, certain rooms seemed to carry an energy that no blueprint could fully erase. Guests described it not as haunting, but as awareness, a subtle feeling that the walls had absorbed a century of secrets and were quietly holding them in trust. Room 1205 was one of those places. Housekeepers spoke about it in hushed tones, not because they feared it, but because it felt unusually alive. One maid swore she once heard the faint rustle of a ball gown brushing past the bed, even though the guest staying there was a middle-aged accountant attending a conference. Another claimed she found a single rose petal on the windowsill, perfectly preserved, though no flowers had been placed in the room for weeks. No one complained, no one asked questions. Instead, the staff understood these small anomalies as reminders, echoes of the grandeur that came before, because in the Waldorf, rooms were not just spaces, they were chapters. Some rooms remembered heartbreak, others remembered triumph, and a few remembered things so magnificent and so tragic that the building seemed determined never to let them go. Suite 3007 had seen a king in exile pace its floors through sleepless nights, staring at telegrams that marked the unraveling of his coup. And staff recalled the heavy silence that hung around him, the sense that the suite itself held its breath with every word he read. Even after the room was redecorated, its furniture replaced, guests reported feeling a gravity they couldn't explain, a quiet pull toward the window, where the king once watched Fifth Avenue, as if searching for a home in a foreign skyline. Then there was Suite 1629, where a Hollywood icon famously spent her final New York winter. She arrived with a suitcase filled not with gowns, but with diaries, letters, and photographs, fragments of a life lived under the spotlight. Staff remembered how she insisted on making her own tea each morning, refusing help, wanting some small part of her life to feel ordinary. After she left, the staff hesitated before cleaning the room. It felt like disturbing the air, where she had whispered her last private thoughts. But the most storied of all was the presidential suite. Every new president who visited left behind something intangible, a sense of gravity that seeped into the carpets, a residue of decisions made under immense pressure. The suite had witnessed moments of diplomacy that shaped the world, rehearsals for historic speeches, and late night doubts that even the newspapers never printed. The staff who tended the room spoke about it with the same reverence a curator has for a national artifact, and yet, for all the grand stories, the Waldorf's most enduring memories came from the ordinary guests, the families celebrating milestones, the young couples saving for years, just to spend one night in luxury. The immigrants who walked in carrying suitcases smaller than their dreams. These were the people who gave the hotel its soul. One evening, a young bellboy found an elderly white woman standing alone in the main corridor, tears in her eyes. She had stayed at the original Waldorf Astoria on her honeymoon decades earlier, in a room that no longer existed. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't famous, but the hotel had been the backdrop of the happiest moments of her life. The bellboy, sensing the weight of her emotion, quietly guided her to the closest equivalent suite in the new building. She stepped inside, took a slow breath, and whispered, "Thank you. It feels the same." It didn't, not really. But that didn't matter. Memoir. Why is not a place. It's a feeling. And the Waldorf Astoria, both the old and the new, had mastered the art of making people feel something larger than themselves. It preserved not just history, but humanity. The old man knew this better than anyone. He had lived long enough to see the hotel reinvented, reborn, reimagined. He had watched the rooms fill with new voices, while still hearing faint echoes of the old ones beneath. To him, the Waldorf was not haunted, it was layered, a palimpsest of American life, rewritten but never erased. And as he walked the new hallways during quiet hours, he felt a truth rising within him, a truth that would define the final chapter of this story. The ghosts were never here to linger. They were here to guide the living. Even in its newest incarnation, the Waldorf Astoria carried a sensation that few guests could articulate. It wasn't nostalgia to many visitors had never seen the original building. It wasn't melancholy, too much laughter still echoed through the bars, lounges, and suites. It was something subtler, quieter, woven into the marble like threads of invisible gold. A sense that beneath the polished surface, the hotel remembered. Late at night, as the lobby emptied and the chandeliers dimmed to a soft amber glow, the building seemed to exhale. The rush of footsteps faded. Elevators hummed softly in their shafts, and the silence, deep, velvety, almost sacred, brought out the echoes of decades past. One of the night porters, a man named Raymond, once described it best. "After midnight," he said, "the Waldorf feels like a conversation between the past and the present." He wasn't wrong. Sometimes, the staff found reminders tucked into unexpected places. A vintage cufflink discovered behind a radiator, a handwritten note slipped beneath an old drawer lining. "Meet me by the Palm Court. 8 p.m. A faded perfume scent lingering in a room hours after a guest checked out, disappearing as quickly as it arrived. These weren't supernatural events. They were the fingerprints of time, and the staff learned to treat them respectfully, almost tenderly, as if they were caring for a living museum that quietly curated its own exhibits. The most profound echoes came from the service corridors, the hidden arteries of the hotel, known only to employees. In these narrow hallways, the original workers had on rushed trays of food to grand banquets, whispered gossip while folding linens, and comforted one another during the lean years of war and depression. Even after renovations, even after modern efficiency replaced old routines, these hallways carried a warmth that defied explanation. One evening, a new housekeeper named Elena stopped mid-shift. She said she heard laughter, not mocking, not eerie, but light, joyful, like a celebration from long ago. When she turned the corner, the space was empty. The older staff didn't dismiss her. They smiled knowingly, because they, too, remembered their first time hearing the Waldorf echoes inside the Grand Ballroom, the most famous of all the hotel spaces. The echoes were even stronger, music-y, and swore the acoustics held a resonance that made every rehearsal shimmer. Dancers claimed the floorboards responded to footsteps like a living stage, as if thousands of waltzes had taught the floor how to welcome Mo. Most guests only saw beauty, but those who paused, those who really listened felt history pressing close. Foreign dignitaries felt it during diplomatic banquets. Broadway stars felt it during opening night celebrations. Even world leaders, jaded by power and protocol, sometimes paused at the edge of the ballroom before stepping inside, sensing the weight of those who came before them. And yet, the most intimate echoes lingered not in the ballrooms, but in the smallest spaces, the elevators. The Waldorf's ornate elevators had carried some of the most extraordinary figures of the 20th century, heads of state, movie stars, scientists, athletes, but they had also carried ordinary families visiting New York for the first time, children squeezing their parents' hands as the doors slid shut, eyes widening as the elevator glided upward toward rooms that felt impossibly grand. The elevator operators of earlier decades recorded everything: heartbreaks, reunions, proposals whispered under dim lights, arguments between lovers who made up before the next floor. Those enclosed spaces became confessional booths, emotional crossroads, tiny stages where humor and stories played out between brass railings and velvet-lined panels. Even in the modern era, some guests admitted that when the elevator doors closed, they felt a strange stillness, like stepping into a pause in the city's relentless movement. Perhaps it was the solitude, perhaps it was the craftsmanship, or perhaps it was the residue of 1,000 lives briefly intersecting. And through all of this, the old man, his hair now silver, his pace slower, but steady, walked the halls with the quiet assurance of someone who had lived many lives inside the same story. To him, the new Waldorf Astoria was not a replacement. It was a continuation, a second breath, a vessel carrying the spirit of the original building across eras, generations, and skylines. He saw no contradiction in loving both versions of the hotel, because he understood something fundamental. Buildings change, cities change, people change, but meaning endures. It is carried by those who remember, by those who listen, by those who sense the invisible and honor it. As he paused in the lobby one quiet morning, sunlight pouring through the tall windows like liquid gold, he realized that the ghosts of the Waldorf were not remnants of the past. They were guides leading the hotel and the people within it toward what it was meant to become. And soon, in part 9, he would reveal the lesson that took a lifetime to understand, that the Waldorf Astoria didn't just witness American history, it mirrored it. Morning light spilled across the Park Avenue Waldorf Astoria, turning the marble floors into a mosaic of soft gold. At this hour, before the lobby filled with diplomats and musicians and tourists chasing New York dreams, the hotel felt almost sacred, quiet enough for memory to speak, gentle enough for the past to settle beside the present, tea without fear of being forgotten. The old man, now near the end of his life, stood beneath the same chandelier he had once polished as a boy. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from tea, the weight of the realization forming in his chest. He had spent decades searching for the meaning of this place, hoping the ghosts whispered their stories for a reason. And now, finally, the truth revealed itself with the calm certainty of dawn. The Waldorf Astoria was never about chandeliers or staircases or ballrooms. It was about the people who filled them. He understood that now. It was about the Astor cousins who built monuments out of rivalry, about the staff who carried the hopes of entire migrations on their backs, about the guests who stepped through the doors believing, if only for one night, that life could be extraordinary, and about the city that keeps reinventing itself, even when it must tear down pieces of its own heart to rise higher. He walked slowly through the lobby, each step echoing memories. He saw the young debutante trembling before her first dance. He heard the faint trace of music from a vanished ballroom. He felt the whisper of a king pacing in exiled silence. He sensed the laughter of workers celebrating the end of a long shift. And he remembered standing across Fifth Avenue, watching the original Waldorf fall in a plume of dust that carried a century of dreams into the sky. The Empire State Building now towered above him, bold, unyielding, magnificent. People called it the icon of American ambition, but the old man understood the deeper truth, that Skyscraper's steel bones were forged from the memory of the hotel that came before it. Its foundations were not only architectural, but emotional, built from the stories of thousands who lived their lives inside the Waldorf's walls. The old man moved toward the revolving doors, pausing as a young bellboy rushed past him, nearly tipping over his own feet in excitement. The boy shot him an apologetic grin, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with the eagerness of someone beginning their first chapter. And in that moment, the old man saw himself decades younger, uniformed to big, heart to hopeful, stepping into a world he barely understood but instantly loved. He smiled. He understood now why the ghosts never frightened him. They weren't remnants of loss, they were reminders of continuity, because the Waldorf Astoria, old or new, was never just a hotel. It was a vessel for the human spirit, a mirror held up to America's contradictions, ambition and humility, luxury and struggle, reinvention and nostalgia. A palace born from rivalry, a sanctuary shaped by immigrants, a legend carried by ordinary people doing extraordinary things quietly, faithfully. Every day, the old man pushed gently against the door and stepped into the brisk New York morning. The city roared around him, taxis honking, heels clicking, voices rising like a symphony of ambition. Above it all, the Empire State Building pierced the sky, shimmering with the confidence of a nation still climbing. He took one last low okay at the Waldorf, its facade gleaming in the first light, and he whispered not to the building, but to the memories that lived within him. You're still here, and somehow, he knew it was true. The hotel wasn't confined to brick or marble. It lived in stories, in people, in the skyline itself. In the city that destroys and rebuilds, forgets and remembers, all at the same time. He walked into the crowd, disappearing into the rhythm of New York, a final echo returning to the place that shaped him, a life woven into the legend of a building that never truly died. Back out the Waldorf Astoria was gone, but its spirit, its ghosts, would forever rise with the towers that learned to swallow the sky.